So what is the most disappointing live performance you've seen by a band?
In terms of disappointing, I really had to draw the distinction that it couldn't be disappointing just because I don't like the band. And I think, whenever you go to larger festivals, you run the risk of seeing bands that you're not necessarily into. So it wouldn't really be fair to suggest that Puddle of Mudd was the most disappointing performance I saw, because they were just being themselves. It was that was the intended result. So I would say my most disappointing concert experience would have to be in 2015, seeing Anthrax. Now, they weren't what was disappointing about it. There was a local opening act that they were pretty good, a band I believe called Solar Flare. And they were wanting to wrap up their set with this amazing Iron Maiden cover of Hallowed Be Thy Name. And the lead singer was trying to like intro it really dramatically, like they were going to, hang him or whatever. And the promoters basically wouldn't let them play it because, this is a fairly long song and you're just the local opening act. So unfortunately, we were robbed of the chance to get to hear that. And I'm sure it would have been great. But that was probably the most disappointing live performance I've seen. Was just
even I was in attendance for that one. I remember that.
Yeah, that was. It took me a second to jog my memory on that, but it really unfortunate.
It should be noted too. For obviously, we were all at that event. There were a lot of opening acts. Like clearly, the goal of the tour for Anthrax was to try to promote as many local bands as possible. So there was probably like 7 or 8 opening bands, and it was forever before Anthrax came out. Anthrax was amazing. But yeah, I had completely forgotten that until you mentioned it to me the other day. And I was just like, oh yeah, I feel disappointing. I was just disappointed for them that they didn't get to have their moment.
Absolutely. They were fine for the rest of their set. I'm sure the cover would have been great, but.
And then we had to hear Crowbot.
That falls in the Puddle of Mudd stipulation where I wasn't going to pick them because I believe they sounded exactly like they sound. That was the intended result.
I like to think the eventual tribute to Ronnie James Dio and Dimebag Darrell that night kind of made up for Crowbot's existence.
That should happen every night, whether you're in concert or not. There was another one that came to mind. Was one of the Gigantours I went to, which was like a few years where Megadeth had numerous bands touring with them. This one was at a little place called Annie's down near the river in Cincinnati. And one of the bands who I wasn't really familiar with at the time, Dillinger Escape Plan, played. And when you're going to a concert for bands like Megadeth and Dream Theater, Dillinger Escape Plan is so far on the other side of that. It just seemed like chaos to me. Again, I'm sure it was exactly what it needed to sound like, but I was not prepared for that.
Going back to what Mike said when he got asked this question, I don't want to label a concert as disappointing just because I may not like the band now. And I really can't say I've seen a disappointing show from a showmanship perspective. From this one, I just went from the standpoint of if I could pick a new first concert that I've been to, I probably wouldn't choose Creed and Skillet for my very first introductory musical concert.
Wasn't Skillet any good? I mean, obviously Creed was amazing.
I mean, you got a guy that's giving it his all on a cello, up and down on risers, just rocking out. So, I mean, like I said, from a showmanship perspective, it was all there. I mean, I did get Scott Stapp without the long hair. That was, kind of disappointing there. So that was just the largest disappointment in itself that we got buzzed head Scott Stapp.
Wow, that's some kind of show to kick off your music fandom.
But, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking.
What is the most disappointing live performance you've seen by a band or a musical act?
Skillet. I saw them.
Did they burn your food?
Yes. No. I saw them at a Christian music festival at Kings Island here in Ohio, and their music was so loud. Their pyro was so loud, and you could barely understand any of the words they were saying in their songs.
Their songs have pyro in it?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know WWE likes to use them quite a bit. So, but yeah, as we left, we could hear them better outside of the venue as opposed to inside the venue.
So do you think it was a Skillet issue or was it a Kings Island issue? The way they were like miking them up or the speaker setup or something like that, as opposed to maybe not the band's problem?
Right. And that was what I even talked to my husband about this. Like we were talking about how maybe it wasn't really Skillet. It was more just the way the sound was set up that night. And just maybe there's not as good of acoustics inside of the Timberwolf Stadium at Kings Island, that maybe live they'd be better in like a regular venue.
That is a big challenge. I mean, you go to different venues, and we've been to so many arenas and open air and closed tiny like dive bars, basically. And you just never know what that music mix is going to be like. And it really can affect, if it's the only time you've seen a band, that could be a big impression on a band when it may not even be their fault.
And I don't know, too, if you have multiple music acts performing at the same time
Sure.
that are vastly different, how that works as far as on the mixing side of it. Like maybe the previous group would have sounded really good and they didn't adjust for what Skillet was going to bring.
All right, on the other end of the spectrum, the most disappointing live performance that you've seen by a band.
So the one year we saw Don Dokken live at Riverbend. And I liked some of their hits. I wasn't like a huge guy. And he wasn't the headliner. I don't remember who was headlining that show. Do you remember?
I can't remember if that was a Poison show.
Probably, because that was probably the first time I was going to concerts like that. It was mostly to see Poison. So he was one of the opening acts, and clearly my understanding is that his voice has gotten better since this concert to some degree. Like, it's still not.
I think that's the case.
Yeah, at least from what I've read. But like, clearly he hadn't been taking care of his voice. He was clearly more interested in the drink he had on stage than he was like impressing the crowd. And it just was a disappointing time, because it's like, you're already opening. So like, really all I want to hear is your one or two big hits, as good as you can sing them, and be done with it, really. And that was a struggle.
It doesn't help when you see someone like Sebastian Bach solo who could still sing really well.
Well, I mean, we saw Scorpions.
Yeah.
You see the Scorpions, and it was their 50th anniversary tour.
He could still sing.
He was amazing.
Still sing. And it's like, this guy, I know this guy has lived a tough life, a hard life.
A long one.
A long life.
A couple lives.
I understand that not everybody's voice is different. I certainly understand the voice is an instrument and the things you have to do to take care of it. But it was just disappointing, because it just almost didn't seem like he even cared, that it just wasn't great. And
there was a certain attitude that you kind of got from that.
If you know the guy is just doing his best, and he does kind of, or they try to hide it, because we've seen bands like that too, where they'll bring in backup singers and clearly they're trying to hide the fact they can't do it anymore. It's a little better, but that was one of the few concerts, and luckily it wasn't the headliner, so I didn't feel like we got gypped or anything. It's like, all right, man.
That was one of the cool things, like in the late 90s and early 2000s, is that, given this was way after hair metal had run its course, but you had Poison, who would typically take out like 3 other bands and tour around with it, and tickets were reasonably priced, and you got to see a good show. They weren't relevant anymore, but it didn't really matter.
And my first concert was Poison, Rat, LA Guns, and Great White, and it's a great show.
Yeah,
like it was enjoyable.
Better than Creed and Skillet, I must say.